When Clint Eastwood stepped onto the brightly lit stage of one of America's most watched talk shows, the audience expected just another Hollywood interview. The young, sharp-tongued host, Samantha Reed, was known for dismantling her guests with quick jabs and viral gotcha moments. She thought she was about to make an example out of Eastwood, exposing him as outdated, irrelevant, a relic of the past. But what she didn't know was that Clint wasn't just another guest, and what happened next would become legendary. The stage was set for spectacle. Studio lights blazed, illuminating the sleek, modern set. The audience buzzed with anticipation, eyes locked on the stage, sensing that something big was about to unfold. At the center of it all sat Samantha Reed, a young, sharp-dressed blonde TV host with a reputation for making her guests squirm. She was the media's rising star, a progressive firebrand who thrived on confrontation, cornering public figures and exposing their so-called outdated ways of thinking. Tonight, she had a new target. Clint Eastwood, Hollywood legend, director, actor, icon. A man who had lived more in a decade than most would in a lifetime. He had built his career playing men who never apologized for who they were, rugged, tough, and straight to the point. To Samantha and her audience, he was a fossil from a different era, one they believed had no place in today's world. And that was exactly why he was here. The network executives weren't subtle about what they wanted. They expected Samantha to expose him, to make him look old-fashioned, out of touch, maybe even problematic. A clip of him fumbling through a question, struggling for words, that's what would go viral. That's what would generate clicks, retweets, and headlines. But Clint Eastwood wasn't here to play their game. He sat comfortably in his chair, legs apart, back straight, arms resting lazily on the armrests. No nervous glances, no rehearsed answers, just a man who had seen it all and wasn't about to let some young TV host lecture him on the world. Samantha adjusted her posture, flashing a polished smile. The cameras were rolling. The audience was locked in. The energy in the room crackled with anticipation. She had done this 100 times before. But something about the way Clint sat there, calm, unmoving, eyes sharp as ever, made it clear this wasn't going to go the way she thought. Samantha crossed her legs, pen poised between her fingers, exuding the look of someone who knew she was in control. Tilting her head slightly, she smirked. "Clint, you've built your career on playing the rugged, stoic man's man. But don't you think that image is, well, outdated?" The audience chuckled. A few members nodded, already anticipating Eastwood's slow realization that his time had passed. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Not in agreement, but letting the moment linger just long enough for everyone to feel it. Then he leaned in slightly, not aggressive, not defensive, just firm. "You mean outdated, like telling the truth?" Silence. Then a shift. The chuckles in the audience faltered, some morphing into nervous laughter. Samantha's smirk tightened just a little, the confidence in her eyes flickering. She hadn't expected him to flip it on her so fast. She recovered quickly, keeping her tone light. "I just mean the times have changed. The world doesn't run on that old-fashioned tough guy mentality anymore." Clint exhaled, shaking his head slightly, like a man who had heard this all before. "Yeah," he said, voice slow and steady. "Times have changed. But people—" He tilted his head. "Not as much as you think." The audience was quiet now, waiting. "You think toughness is outdated?" He let the question hang for a beat. "You ever meet a firefighter?" His voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the room like a blade. "A cop? A soldier?" He paused, then locked eyes with Samantha. "You ever talk to a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table?" Samantha blinked. She started to respond, she really did, but— "Didn't think so," Clint interrupted, sitting back, his gaze locked onto her. A few gasps rippled through the audience, a couple of scattered claps. Samantha opened her mouth, trying to take back control, but Clint had already shifted like a gunfighter who had drawn first. "You can sit here and tell me toughness is outdated," he continued, his voice steady, measured. "But the second something goes wrong in your life, the second you're in real trouble," he leaned in slightly, his eyes sharp, "you're going to be looking for someone like me." The energy in the room shifted. Samantha forced another smile, but the audience wasn't laughing at Clint anymore. For the first time, she wasn't leading the interview. Clint Eastwood was, and he wasn't finished yet. Still, she didn't back down. She shifted in her chair, leaning forward, her voice carrying just a hint of challenge. Her eyes narrowed, slightly. "But don't you think masculinity today should be more inclusive? More in touch with emotions?" Clint Eastwood didn't flinch. He sat back in his chair, shoulders relaxed, eyes locked onto hers, with a cool intensity that never wavered. The room seemed to hold its breath as he exhaled slowly, gaze unwavering. "You ever seen a firefighter cry about being too tough when they're running into a burning building?" There it was. The words landed like a punch. Hard. The entire room stiffened. The audience collectively paused, as if trying to process the gravity of the question. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded slowly, as if realizing the simplicity and truth of his words. Samantha blinked. She hadn't expected that. Her confident facade cracked just slightly. "That's not the same thing," she replied, trying to hold her ground, though her voice faltered. Clint didn't give an inch. "You don't think those guys have emotions?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "They still go in, they still do the job, no matter what." The crowd was silent now, absorbing the weight of his words. There was no quick comeback, no snarky remark. Just a seasoned man speaking truth in a way that was impossible to argue with. "You think toughness is a bad thing?" Clint continued, his voice steady. "You ever try to do something when everything's against you? You ever pick yourself up when no one's there to help?" He let the words settle before finishing. "Toughness isn't about being a bully. It's about standing tall when the world is trying to knock you down." Samantha's mouth opened, then closed. The words weren't there. The audience, once divided, was now firmly on Clint's side. She took a breath, trying to regroup. She had one more card to play. Shuffling her cue cards slightly, she adjusted her posture, preparing for a final round. "Okay, Clint, but let's talk about your movies. They glorify violence, right? I mean, isn't that sending the wrong message to young people? Shouldn't we be teaching them conflict resolution instead?" A small smirk flickered across Clint's lips. The crowd felt it, the shift in his demeanor. This wasn't defense anymore. This was offense. "You ever see a movie where the hero saved the day by filing a complaint?" he asked, his voice low but dripping with quiet confidence. The room erupted. Laughter rippled through the audience. Some even applauded. It wasn't just the words. It was the delivery. Clint wasn't playing by Samantha's rules. He was rewriting the script. Samantha's smile tightened, her grip on the conversation slipping even further. She hadn't expected him to be this sharp, this quick. This wasn't the same man she had prepared to deconstruct. Clint leaned back in his chair, unbothered by the laughter filling the studio. "Movies are movies," he said, shrugging slightly. "It's entertainment, but they're also a reflection of the world people are living in." He paused, letting the moment breathe before adding, "The world isn't soft, Samantha. It's a tough place, and sometimes you need a little toughness to make it through." The words hung in the air. Samantha tried to get back on track, but the audience's reaction made it clear. Clint Eastwood had just changed the game. Her confidence, once unshakable, was now in question. Adjusting her posture, She forced her polished TV host smile back into place. But something was different now. She wasn't leading the conversation anymore. Clint was, and the audience, they felt it too. Taking a breath, she tried a different angle. But don't you think old-school toughness has led to toxic masculinity? She said, her tone careful but pointed. Wouldn't society be better if men didn't feel the need to be so aggressive? The audience murmured, sensing the weight of the question. A few heads nodded in agreement. This was her moment. If she could get him to stumble, to admit that traditional masculinity was outdated, she could reframe the conversation. But Clint Eastwood, he didn't hesitate. His expression didn't change. He simply leaned forward, resting his elbows on the armrests, his eyes steady. Then, in that signature low, deliberate voice, he asked, "Would you say that to a single mother working 2 jobs to keep food on the table?" Silence. Not just from Samantha, but from the entire audience. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The energy in the room shifted again. This wasn't about masculinity anymore. This was about resilience, about survival, about real toughness. Clint let the moment hang, his gaze unwavering. Then, he continued, his voice even but firm. "You think toughness is just about throwing punches? It's about pushing forward when life is hard. It's about standing up when no one else will." He let the words settle before adding, "You take that away from people, tell them it's a bad thing, and what do you have left?" The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were listening. Samantha swallowed. She had planned for this interview, studied her talking points, rehearsed her approach, but she hadn't planned for this, and worse, she was losing them. She wasn't smiling anymore. She shifted slightly in her chair, gripping her cue cards a little tighter. This wasn't going how it was supposed to. The audience wasn't looking at her anymore. They were looking at him. She needed to break his momentum, fast. If she couldn't win the argument, she could, at least, make him look old-fashioned out of touch. With a practiced exhale, she went for it. "You've been accused of being out of touch," she said, tilting her head slightly, her voice